And we're back. You are listening to the Talking Boxing with Billy C radio show. You're watching us on the Fight Now television channel. And hey, by the way, man, don't forget, we got a survey. We need you to help us, man. We want to get on another television carrier, and we need you to fill out a survey. It'll take about 1 minute. 1 minute at a time. Just go to our website, www.BillyCBoxing.com, and right on the right-hand side, you'll see a fight poster that says AT&T and Fight Now, and click on that, and all you got to do is fill out a couple of things, and that'll expedite us getting on the AT&T Uverse network, which I think it's on something like 30-something states. So, hey, if you're listening to the show on a radio station, you listen to it on a podcast, and you want to watch it on TV, go fill out that survey. Hey, better yet, just fill out the survey. I don't even if you have another television provider, just go do it. What are you? FightNow.com, all the information you can find out on their website, www.fightnow.com. And speaking of now, joining us all the way from Sin City himself, Tony Triem. What's up, brother?
Not much, my friend. I filled out your survey.
Good. Well, I tell you what, you better get your wife and your friends and the neighbors and everybody else to fill it out, man. What do you guys have out there in Vegas anyway? Who's your television provider?
It's AT&T, but it's not Verizon. We have AT&T Dish.
Oh, okay. Well, this is AT&T. They call it AT&T Uverse. It's called. I'm sorry. Uverse. It's called AT&T Uverse, and it's in. I'm looking at it right now. 131 markets, 22 states, 3.4 million people have it. So we're excited, man. We can't wait to get on that one.
Oh man, that's really gonna boost you big, man.
Well, hey,
that's going to be a real addition to your show, which. You do a great show, and I enjoy every morning I listen to you, and you do good work, man.
Well, I appreciate that, and we've been on the cusp, and these companies now, they want to see how many people can they actually generate. So we've been challenged. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to put it out to the listeners and the viewers and let them help us. But you're going to help the listeners right now because we've been doing a new segment of yours, and it's the Heavyweight Spotlight. But today we decided to do something a little different. And instead of putting the spotlight on one specific guy, we're going to talk about the heavyweight division in general. And I want to kick it off. Now, just to remind all the viewers and listeners, you guys know what the basis of the show is. It's based on two guys that are hanging out, and they start a conversation about boxing. And, being a boxing fan, we all know what happens after you start talking about boxing, and that's what Tony and I are going to prove right now. So I wanted to ask you something, Tony, and we've been talking about it for the last couple of weeks, and the big topic with heavyweights right now is the fact that the two Klitschko brothers are dominating the heavyweight division, and the age-old question is, well, how good are they? And I know you don't like to put, dream matchups and stuff unless we had a time machine, but my question is compared to some of these other heavyweights back in the day, the guys like Jack Dempsey and Rocky Marciano, even Sonny Liston, you and I both love Sonny Liston, even Mike Tyson, how would they have fared against the Klitschko brothers, either one?
The big ugly bear, Sonny Liston, I loved him, and he had one of the most beautiful jabs out there for a big man. He hit like a kicking mule, and I don't think either one of the Klitschko's chins would hold up to Sonny's power, to be honest with you, in my opinion. But I'm kind of partial to Sonny in a lot of ways. Where a lot of people knock him, I don't. He was a great heavyweight, and he was one of the most feared men in the world. And they didn't want him to be the heavyweight champion. They feared him, but. To put the Klitschkos, I'm not a fan of the Klitschkos. I never have been a fan of the Klitschkos. I think the older brother, I think it's Vitali, and you got Vladimir is the younger one. I think that Vladimir in their younger days was the better of the two, and then the older one,
Vitali.
He quit, then he comes back, and he was considered the lineal champion, which I never thought he was a lineal champion. Lennox Lewis was the last lineal champion we had in the heavyweight division, in my opinion. A lot of people disagree with that, and that's cool. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, let me ask you this. You're adamant about not really caring about the Klitschkos, and I got to be honest, I didn't either, and it took me a really long time to give them credit. And then at one point in time, Ruslan Shagayev was a heavyweight champ. He had one of the belts or whatever, and I liked him. I thought that he was a legitimate heavyweight. I liked him. I thought he was the best heavyweight out there, and he finally fought one of the brothers, and he lost. He got beat up bad. And at that point in time, I started saying to myself, well, maybe these guys aren't that bad. Maybe they are better than I thought. And I started to soften up to them a little bit, but I always keep in the back of my mind that you can only be as good as the division is during your era. So they have fought and beat everybody. You mentioned Lennox Lewis. I thought he went through the same thing. While he was a champ, I was never impressed with him. I think I got more impressed with Lennox Lewis after he retired and that he stayed retired. What do you think?
Absolutely. Lennox Lewis is one of those underrated fighters. He's a big man, exceptionally big man. He was kind of like a Primo Carnera, size-wise I'm talking about. Lennox Lewis had a jab, and he hit hard, and people don't give him the credit that he deserves. Even when he was champion, they didn't give him the credit that he deserved. And as you look back in time and you watch the big guys and the big prize fighters, you talk about your Jack Dempseys, your Jack Sharkeys, your James J. Jeffries, and go on and on. You can go on forever with a list of great heavyweights. But Lennox Lewis go down as a great prize fighter of all time? No, he will not. But he will. He is underrated, and he is going to go down as a good fighter of his time, and he needs that credit. He was phenomenal in the ring. He did great stuff.
Let me throw this at you, because this is something that we're battling too. Now, you and I can sit here and we can talk about the great fighters. We mentioned Sonny Liston. We mentioned James Jeffries. We mentioned Jack Dempsey. And these are all fighters that we've seen clips of, and we've read books on and everything else, and we put them historically in perspective with the heavyweight division. Now let's fast forward 30 years from now, when you and I are going to be looking at the grass from the opposite side, and and now we got the kids that are out there today that are in their 30s. Now they're going to be in our position 30 years from now, and they may not be remembering those Jack Dempseys and the Sonny Listons and the Joe Lewises and the Rocky Marcianos. They're going to be looking at the video that they have available to them, which is going to be Lennox Lewis and Klitschko and Mike Tyson. Is that going to affect what we call all-time greats someday down in the future?
Well, Billy, that's an interesting question, and it's a cool concept. But really stop and think about the fighters, the guys that are historians. They call themselves historians today, and I use that term loosely. And I take being a historian seriously. And if you're going to be a historian, you should know something about boxing. And what I mean by that is the history of the sport, from the conception of James J. Figg, the first heavyweight champion record, to present time. You should know what the fighters did and where they were in their careers, and who the opponents were and where the opponents were in their career when they fought that opponent, to give them a good assessment of their boxing career. But if you look at a historian today, how many of them, and I don't mean this disrespectful, but how many of them can go past the 70s today?
No.
How many of them can talk past Muhammad Ali, the greatest of all time, self-proclaimed? I hate the SOB. He was not the greatest of all time, but a lot of people can't go past Muhammad Ali and then call themselves boxing historians. So when you're saying move it forward 30 years from now, when you and I are looking at the other side of the dirt, I think it's hopefully boxing is going to improve in the next few years. We got some good fighters coming up, and hopefully the boxing is going to improve. It always ebbs and flows like a river. It has its good and its bad times, and it has been that way since its conception. But a historian 30 years from now, I don't have a crystal ball as you don't. We can only assume and come up with, what we think is going to happen. I'm hoping that the up-and-coming historians and the up-and-coming true boxing fans will look at boxing more seriously and look at the whole conception. But I think that your point is pretty much right on. They're not even. They will probably won't go past Lennox Lewis if they get that far.
Right, and then I mean we can argue, and I understand why you don't like to have the dream matchups, and I'm not going to put one at you, but let's take a guy like now James Jeffries. I'm glad you mentioned his name because I was amazed at some of the stuff I learned about James Jeffries with several books I read about him, and to give it. I mean, but think about the one thing, and I think you and I talked about this one time off the air. But one thing that he prided himself on was how he was able to train a whole day with a quart of water. That's it. He would limit himself to 1 quart of water, right? So we know today that, this guy's lucky he didn't drop dead from dehydration. But with that mentality, with that thought process, if that fighter, if James Jeffries were around today, and, he had the benefit of today's technologies and knowing that, eating raw meat maybe isn't the answer. Not having any greens with your food maybe wasn't the answer. Maybe drinking a little more than a quart of water or instead of, hunting for mountain lions and fishing for a month at a time and train. That was what he used to do for training. Maybe if he trained the way they do today, I think that he would have been that much better. What do you think?
God, you come up with some good ideas, man. Jeffries is one of my favorite of all time. I have many favorites, but Jeffrey is one of my favorites, and I rate him really, really high in the history of boxing. And he was undefeated, and he trained like a workhorse. And you're right, he only drank a quart of water a day, and that kind of with the techniques of the day. I kind of have mixed emotions on that a little bit, Billy, and this is why. They say the prize fighter today gets bigger, he's better, he's stronger. Well, is he really bigger and better and stronger? Look at Jeffries. There wasn't too many men, and including men today, that was bigger, better, and stronger than him.
Well, technique.
He was a strong heavyweight. But he was a bad boy.
But technique-wise, he was primitive by today's standards. Even if we fast forward to Sonny Liston's time, James Jeffries didn't utilize a jab the way Sonny Liston did. So obviously, the sport evolved. You mentioned James Figg as the father of boxing. Here's a guy that. The era that he fought in, he dominated. He dominated for 20-something years. But that style of fighting, that we'll call it boxing, it was prize fighting, bare knuckle, that's evolved. So it's hard, and that's why I respect your opinion of you can't really put them. You can't have the dream matchups, but we could say, well, how would this guy fare? With taking advantage. I had an interesting email. I know it's not heavyweight. But someone said, hey, if Sugar Ray Robinson were alive today and he had the training techniques and the dieting and everything else, he would have been that much better. And I think, that really put it in perspective, and it got me thinking about this conversation that we're having right now.
And that email that you read on your radio show this morning, he worded that really, really well. He needs to be complimented on that. He did a good job on that email. I was impressed with it. And Robinson, of course, is one of the greatest of all time, and a lot of people consider him the number one prize fighter of all time, that he's the best of any prize fighter in any era of any weight class, and that's kind of hard to argue. But going back to Jeffries, he did have good footwork, and he did utilize the jab to a degree in his day where that he don't get credit for that. He was for a big man, he was fast and he was fluid, however you say the damn word. He was one of the best out there, and if you had a James J. Jeffries fighting today, he would be he would be dominating the heavyweight division.
You know, we talk about, and I'm going to bring Sonny Liston's one of my favorite fighters too. So
he's a great guy.
Yeah, and I since you brought him up earlier, it's like it's for some reason he's become the hub of my thought process here. And I look at his era, and you know, you take that era, the 60s and early 70s, you know. You can't get a better era, really, in our lifetime for heavyweights. At least that's the way we look at it today. But the funny thing about that, and I always laugh when you say that about Ali, because we're old enough to know what was going on around Ali. I remember watching Muhammad Ali, and sometimes I liked him, sometimes I didn't. Now you talk to everybody, and they have him on a pedestal. You forget about all the antics and everything else. But during that era, there was so many good heavyweights that today easily would have been world champ. Jerry Quarry, who you look at as an opponent, the guy from Canada, who George Chuvalo, who never was knocked out. You know, I mean, what about him? You know, Zora Foley, Eddie Machen. You know, all these guys were just, you know, so talented, and they were the regular guys. They were the contenders. You know, I mean, today they would have been the tops.
Well, you know, Billy, back in those days, and I'm going to, you used the 60s and 70s, and I think of our era, probably the 60s and 70s was the best in the heavyweight division that we're ever going to see in our lifetime. And I think that you can agree with that.
Yeah, but you know what the funny thing about that is, if you talk to an old-timer in the 60s, they'd be telling you, these fighters of today, they're nothing like they were in the 40s and the 50s. You know, I mean, you always think the era before is better, right?
Well, yes, but history proves that in boxing, the older era is better. But look at it this way. Or I shouldn't say, let's look at it this way. Back in the day when you're talking about Big Cat Williams and Zora Foley and George Chuvalo and Ernie Terrell and the list can go on and on and on and on. The competition was tough and it was deep. If you were a top 10 contender, you had 100,000 people competing for that top 10 rating, and you had a tough opponents every time you stepped between the ropes. And to be a top 10 contender must have been a great feeling of pride. But to be a champion in that era, it must have been phenomenal, because the competition was deep and you had thousands of people competing against. Today, you have 47 weight classes. You have 32 champions in each weight class or more. You cannot tell me who the champions are in all 8 weight classes, because there aren't 8 weight classes, and there's only 250 people competing, and you would have to try hard not to be a champion today.
True. And what bothers me the most is that, like you said, back in the day, and we're talking about, any time, let's say from, the mid-'70s prior, there were 10 world-ranked fighters, 10. So when you got to number 10, that was a big deal. You might as well throw a party, because you're number 10 in the world. That meant something. Today, you could conceivably, if we just, for argument's sake, pick 5 sanctioning bodies, which could have 5 world champions, you could have 50 contenders. I mean, you put it in perspective, and to be the world champion, you were the top dog. You were the baddest guy on the planet. When you became a world heavyweight champ, there was nobody better than you.
And your name was better known in some cases than the President of the United States if you was the heavyweight champion of the world.
True.
I mean, that was the baddest man on the planet, as you said. And, and what's funny, let's go back to a guy that started fighting in 1953. He ended his career in 1970. He never really retired, but he never fought again after 1970. Unfortunately, he died in a swimming pool accident in Tucson, Arizona. But he had 96 fights. He never was considered a great heavyweight, although he was in the top 10 90% of his career. He was dodged by every champion in his era. They didn't want to fight him until Ali finally gave him a chance, and that's Zora Foley. He had 96 fights. He's not even considered in any Hall of Fame.
I know, it's a shame.
This man deserves credit. I mean, he was not a fan pleaser because he didn't have a killer instinct. He didn't want to, he didn't. If he'd let you off the hook. If he hurt you, he'd let you off the hook. He only had 44 knockouts out of his 79 wins, but he was a type of a fighter that people forget. He was, and he fought in the 70s, and he's not a household name, but he should be. If you have the intestinal fortitude to get into the ring and put your life on the line, then you deserve to be remembered. And he did it 96 friggin' times.
I can't argue. I mean, and the sad part about it is these same so-called historian and boxing experts that we referred to earlier, they probably never even heard of the guy, and it's a shame. It is a shame.
And that's my point.
It is a shame.
That was my point, Bill.
No, I agree with you 110%. And the other thing that gets me a lot too, believe it or not, we're running out of time. And I told you this. I told you that when you start talking, time flies. We could be talking for 3 hours. But what bothers me is and I know I got to be quick here, but Jack Johnson. Jack Johnson today. We never really. The sad part about Jack Johnson, and you know what? We'll close it at this, and we'll pick up at another time. And I just want to get your quick thoughts. But Jack Johnson was a fighter that we remember, and unfortunately, a lot of people look at him for other things. But he was a guy that we may never have ever seen the best of, Tony, because this was a guy that literally toyed with his opponents. I read descriptions of him. He was like a cat toying with a mouse. If he didn't really want to kill it, he just wanted to beat it up a little bit, and that was that. Quick thoughts on Jack Johnson.
Jack Johnson was before his time. That was one of the greatest heavyweights out there, and he probably should be listed in all-time greats as probably number 2 or 3. And in some cases, some historians rate him as number 1. He was phenomenal. And, I don't get into that racial crap that a lot of people do with him. And you're right. He toyed with these fighters. He would catch a punch in midair and hit you with the hand he caught the punch with.
Oh.
I mean, show me a fighter to do that today.
Right.
He had boxing skills and ring knowledge and savvy that's unheard of. And it's unparalleled. A phenomenal heavyweight champion.
It's funny. I know I said I was only going to say one more thing, but, it's funny because he started young, and he was on his own and everything else, and he contributes, at least his own memoirs, said that he contributed a lot of his skill to another guy that's virtually forgotten, Joe Chewinski, who taught him how to box. He claims that he taught me how to box, is what Jack Johnson said, while the two of the guys were in jail for fighting. How ironic was that?
Chewinski was more of a light heavyweight than he was a heavyweight, but he was a hell of a prize fighter, and yes, he did teach a lot of skills to Jack Johnson when they were in jail. That's a true story, and that's correct. And Chewinski is another one that's forgotten.
Right. Right.
And he fought on barges. He fought back in the days when it was illegal to fight, and they'd have to go out in Benicia, California, at Benicia Bay. He fought Jeffries out in a barge that was anchored to the bottom of the Benicia Bay so they could hold the prize fight because he couldn't hold it on land, and so the cops wouldn't come in and intervene and stop the fight.
No,
Chewinski was a hell of a pug.
And what he really did was, it wasn't that he taught Jack Johnson. He basically showed Jack Johnson how to utilize his own skill that Chewinski knew that Jack Johnson had, and he did not have any problem crossing the color barrier either.
Absolutely not.
Somebody should write a book on Joe Chewinski. I don't think there's anything on him, is there?
Very little's out there on Lewinsky, and you know that would be a great read. That he was a lot of people say that Jack Root was the first light heavyweight champion and of the world, and in fact he was the first light heavyweight champion of America. Joe Joinski was the first light heavyweight champion of the world.
You know, I think there you have it. Tony Triem and Billy C are going to jointly do a book on Joe Chewinski. How about that?
That would be a great thing to do, and I'd love to do that with you. That would be a wonderful book, and I think it would sell well.
That's all you and I need is more projects, right?
Well, now that I'm retired or retarded, whatever way you want to put it, I've got the time as you do.
That sounds good. Tony, it was great, and we look forward to the next time, my friend.
Thanks, champ. It's a pleasure, and I wish you luck on your AT&T thing, man. I have already filled out, like I told you, I've already filled out the survey, and I'll get a lot of people to do it for you myself. Sounds good, my man. I appreciate it. Thanks, Billy. All right, take care. All right, man. That's my main man, Tony Triem, and we're talking about heavyweights. I know. Tony normally does the heavyweight spotlight, but we decided to mix it up a little bit, and we're going to continue this conversation next time. In the meantime, I got to take a break. I'll be right back.